Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hey, true crime fans. Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Super real.
Hey, I'm Julian Morgans, and you're listening to What It Was Like, the show that asks people who have lived through big, dramatic events what it was like. Here in Australia, it's getting into summer, and I'm thrilled. I love summer. Bring on some beach trips, falling asleep with the ceiling fan, zinc cream, sunburn. But I've also got another less charming summer association. And that's bushfires. And I think that's because I grew up in one of the most fire-prone regions in the world. Or that's what we were always told when we were kids. This was the Dandenong Ranges. It's just outside of Melbourne, and like the name suggests, it's a series of ranges, big mountains, all covered in eucalyptus forests. And every year we used to get bushfires. And I remember one year, I think I was about 10, and there was this big fire in particular that took out 40 houses nearby, and it actually killed 3 people. And my parents, they had some friends who knew the people who died. So it kind of felt close to home. And there was a lot of talk in the area that an arsonist had actually lit the fire deliberately. And I never found out if that was true. I'm not sure if anyone did. But it's the backstory to how I grew up with this awareness of arson as a criminal profile. And I think this is just such a bizarre but fascinating form of criminality. People who light fires just for kicks, for a sense of power. To me, that is so weird. And I wanted to do an arsonist story for a long time, to just talk it out, to understand the psychology. And then recently, I found this name, John Leonard Orr. And John is notable because he's America's worst arsonist by numbers of fires lit. He's likely responsible for about 2,000 fires, one of which actually killed 4 people. And he operated for 3 decades and was particularly busy through the 80s before he was finally arrested in 1991. And I think the other thing that's interesting about John is that he's almost an archetypal arsonist, or certainly from my perspective. He's like a caricature of popular culture's notion of what an arsonist should be. First up, he was a firefighter, so this is a big tick. He was actually a firefighter before he became an arson investigator with the Glendale Fire Department, just outside of Los Angeles. So he also seemed to have a sexual attraction to fire, so another big tick there. And he was often seen videotaping the very fires that he'd lit. But what's truly unique in the world of arson is that we know anything about John at all. Most arsonists are never caught. Here in Australia, satellite analysis of 113,000 fires between 1997 and 2009 found that at least 40% of them were deliberately lit, and that likely represents thousands of people. But the percentage of people who get successfully identified and prosecuted are in the single digits. John's still in prison to this day. He's serving a life sentence in California, but he's always maintained his innocence. But the purpose of today's interview isn't to examine the case. It's to try and assess who John is. Who are these people? And it's really hard to know, but John's daughter is going to lend us a hand. Laurie Orr grew up around John. She's known him her entire life. And she's going to help us to understand what motivates an arsonist, what an arsonist's life looks like, how they treat their kids, and what other areas of their lives are colored by their very, very peculiar psychology. But to me, this isn't just a story about arson. I think this is a story about how the families of criminals are also affected by criminality. Leonard Orr, as you're going to hear today, is a really smart, gentle soul. And she's going to describe how having America's worst serial arsonist as a dad has affected her life and her own experience of being a daughter. So without further ado, I bring you Leonard Orr. Hey, Laurie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. Let's go back. Let's go back to your childhood. I know that your parents separated when you were pretty young. Set the scene for me. What are some of those earliest memories of your father?
Well, my mom and dad separated when I was only a year old, so I don't even remember a time when my parents were together. So my earliest memories were going back and forth every other weekend. Dad was mostly working when we were at his house visiting. We'd go camping a lot, go to the desert a lot. We would go to the firemen's musters that they would go to every year, where the firemen would roast a pig on the beach and do all kinds of different competitions with the other fire departments and stuff. So we would see all the men talking to my dad and saying, "Hey, John," they all respected him. And it was a camaraderie that they had between the firemen. So yeah, we had a lot of fun with my dad.
How would you have described him back then? I mean, it sounds like he was a bit of a hero. You looked up to him. Can you give me a sense of what he looked like and how you thought of him?
Well, I mean, he looked like Dad. I mean, like any other fireman out there, but he always held himself really like what I could describe now as kind of a cool guy. That's how I thought of him. He was very relaxed, but yet felt comfortable in every situation. He always kind of carried himself like he was the most important person in the room, and he would talk to anyone, and he felt really important amongst his work buddies. Everyone would come to him, talk with him. And so, we felt honored that we were his kids, So yeah, we kind of looked at him as a hero.
Yeah. Can you give me a anecdote or a memory where, because of course in this story, you find out that your dad isn't exactly who you thought he was. I'm looking for moments in your childhood or things that you've reflected on where you're like, that was a bit weird, or that didn't add up. Did you ever have any sense that there was more going on?
I have asked myself that question for 30 years now. And there was only one instance that my dad did something out of the ordinary. And that one time, my sister and I were in his car. He had picked us up from my mom's house and we were driving to his house. And he drove a work vehicle because he was an arson investigator. And he also had the old-fashioned, I'm dating myself here, he had an old-fashioned light that you can pull people over with that you put on top of your car. So someone had cut him off on the freeway, and he put that light on the top of his car and pulled somebody over. And he was about to get out of his car, so he told my sister and I, "Get down underneath the dashboard and don't get out until I say you can get out." And he reached in the glove compartment and took out a gun and got out of the car. And so my sister and I, first of all, we didn't know there was a gun in that glove compartment. We didn't know what he was doing. And so we just stayed down in that floorboard shaking, not knowing what was going on. We never heard a gunshot. We don't know what happened while we were down there. But after a little while, Dad came back in the car, put the gun back in the glove compartment, drove off, and never mentioned it again.
Wow.
We didn't know what to make of it, and we never really told anybody about it. But that was the first time that it was out of the ordinary.
Yeah. What did you take away from that as a kid?
Because of his job, we wrote it off as maybe that was a potential suspect or something for his job. Or, we trusted him so much that we wrote it off as he must have had to do that.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at that moment now, when you reflect on those memories, what do you draw from it?
I draw a lot from it now. I look at it as, him needing control, first of all. And he had to show his authority. He always wished he was a police officer instead of a fireman. And I think that was one of those times that he wanted to show his power. And so that's kind of what I make of it now.
I mean, this is some serious armchair psychology here, but it feels to me like there's an attraction to power there. That is a big power move. He's not even a cop, and he's going to you kids, get down. Dad's going to sort this out, and he's got a gun. This is like role playing, sort of a real authority figure.
Right. Absolutely.
So tell me about your early years. In this period, we've been talking about your dad. You're a kid. Like, what was happening for you?
Well, while Dad was out being the hero, my sister and I were at home with Mom and a stepdad. And it was a pretty horrible stepdad, who was abusive, both verbally, physically, mentally, all of those things. So, we were probably just in the thick of things at home. So when we did get to go with Dad, that was like, it was a break. It was vacation from the nightmare that was at home. And we really didn't tell Dad about that and what was going on there for, many years. Eventually we did. But in the younger years, we just really didn't say much about it.
So I understand as a teenager, I think you were 15, 16, you did finally tell your dad what was going on at home. What happened? Walk me through it.
Well, somewhere around, I want to say I was 13 or 14, actually. My sister and I were at a visit with my dad, and he was at work, of course. And we were at his house with his wife at the time, Wanda, and we were talking to her about it. And we actually, Wanda was our favorite wife that he had. He had 4 of them, and, she was my favorite at least. And we opened up to her and told her about the abuse that was going on at home. And she was just appalled with the things that we were telling her. And so we waited. And when Dad got home, she sat him down and made us tell him everything again that we had told her. And, he seemed shocked. He seemed angry. And he seemed like he was going to do something about it. And so, my sister and I were relieved that we had finally got that off our shoulders and that, Dad's going to do something about it. Dad's going to stop it, So we kind of waited till after the visit thinking that there was going to be some type of explosion between the parents. And nothing happened. Didn't hear anything. Nothing happened at all. I finally heard sometime that week that my dad called my mom and just said, "What's going on?" That was it. Nothing happened. Nothing changed. So I felt really, really let down by my dad. I really thought, what I really thought is that my dad would go there and kick my stepdad's ass. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I just didn't get it. So, that is what I would say was the first time that I ever really had a doubt in my mind about my dad. Ever. Like, that was the very first time that I thought maybe he's not who I think he is. A small doubt, but not, that maybe he's just not the person that I think he is.
So obviously he wasn't quite the simple, perfect dad that you thought or you'd hoped. This was late 80s, early 90s. There was suddenly a little bit of I don't know, his work as a fire investigator came under a bit of critique. Just take me through this period.
Well, from my perspective, I didn't know any of that was going on. I had no idea he was being investigated. Looking back now, remember that we didn't see him as often in our teen years, but we had no idea he was being investigated for anything at all. We thought he was doing great. He was teaching classes on arson investigations. He was going to these conventions. Again, our great, proud hero dad, that's what we were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when he was arrested, and I understand he was arrested in 1991, did you see this coming, or was this a bolt out of the blue?
I had just graduated high school in 1991, and we had no idea this was coming. And I literally did not know it happened, that he was arrested, until I saw him on TV being arrested. So I had walked in, I was with a boyfriend of mine. We walked into his parents' house. I walked by, went into their kitchen, and his parents said, "Lori, your dad's on TV." And I said, "I know, he's always on TV talking about fires and stuff like that." Because I had seen him numerous times on TV talking about different cases. And I'd tell my friends to watch the news. He's on the news. So I answered that way. And they said, "No, I really think you need to come in here and see this." So I walked back into the living room, and I see my dad handcuffed and being put into a police car. And I'm just staring at the TV going, I don't understand. And then I'm listening, and it's saying, he's being arrested for arson. And I can't even describe the state of confusion that was in my head at that moment. I just didn't understand. Yeah. So I immediately ran to the telephone and called my mom and said, "Mom, what is going on?" She's like, "I don't know what's going on." My mom was not married to him anymore, so she wasn't privy to any information. So I hung up with her and called my dad's wife, Wanda, and said, "What's going on?" And she immediately said that it's a mistake. He was arrested, but it's a mistake. I talked to your dad. It is a fireman that's doing this, but it's not him. Your dad knows who it is, but this is all just a mistake. He needs to explain it to them, and it'll all be sorted out. I'm like, okay, there's nothing else I could have said at that moment. I'm just like, okay. Yeah. So I guess that was enough for me at the moment.
And to be clear, the accusation was that he'd been deliberately lighting fires.
Yes, it was only being arrested for arson at that given time.
Okay.
Which is enough. But yeah, that was enough for me at that point. And I think I just stopped consuming the information that was going at that point. I just was turned off at that point. Yeah.
Why did you turn away? It was hard. It was painful.
It was too much. Yeah, it was too much to handle. I couldn't retain any more information. It was just too confusing, difficult, and it didn't feel real.
Yeah.
And then shortly thereafter, I want to say the following week, he was able to get out and do house arrest. And so we went and visited Dad at his house.
Okay. Tell me about that meeting.
So we went to his house, and he was, working on things for his case and stuff. It was very awkward. He said the same things, that it was all a mistake. He was going to work it all out, get it straightened out. He would be relieved of all of these charges. And I remember my sister and I were oddly silent, and we didn't ask a lot of questions. Actually, I don't even remember asking any questions. And when we left there, I remember my sister and I saying, he sure didn't act like someone who is innocent. I said, if I was innocent and I was wrongly accused of lighting fires, I feel like I'd be screaming and yelling, to my kids, you guys have to believe me. I would never do something like this, like begging you to believe that I would never do this. None of that. None of that. Not even words came out of his mouth about being innocent. Like, he never said, I'm innocent. I don't think he ever even said, I didn't do this. He just kept saying that there's a fireman that did this. This is a mistake, stuff like that. So my sister and I took note of that but let it go. He kept saying it was a mistake. And at that point in time, we had no reason to believe that he would lie to us or that he was a bad person or that he was capable of any of this. We trusted him 100% in everything that he said. I mean, now we feel kind of stupid, but at the time we believed him.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's understandable. You'd always known him through a child's perspective. And especially because I guess you hadn't been living with him as well. There's a whole range of reasons why it would have been hard to get a sense of who he was until any of this came out or until he was arrested. All right. So tell me about the process of between him getting arrested and the trial.
Well, he had some trial in the Fresno area, and we weren't part of that. And he was found guilty of some fires that he had set out there. And then he came to LA and was facing some of the fires here, in Los Angeles. Then he took like kind of a plea bargain for some of those. But because he did a plea bargain on those cases, that really gave them more ammunition to bring up more. And that's how they brought the Ole's fire into, and to take him to trial on that and bring in the murders from that.
Okay. Can you tell me about that fire? Just for anyone listening, like this was really the significant fire in his career as an arsonist. So can you walk us through it?
Right. There were actually two significant fires. One was the Ole's fire, and that's a hardware store. It was a really big fire, and there were 4 lives that were taken in that fire. There were 2 employees, store employees, that died. They had helped people out of the fire, but then they ended up being trapped inside. And then there was a grandmother and her grandson that both were not able to get out of the fire. And they passed away inside. So they were able to not only charge my dad with the arson for that fire, but also 4 counts of murder. Lighting a store on fire during business hours to me is, premeditated murder. And
yeah, it's crazy.
That's what happened. And so he should have been tried for murder, and that's what happened.
And I understand he used a incendiary. Yeah,
incendiary.
He used an incendiary device to light that one up.
Right.
Can you tell me about that?
Well, what happened is a lot of the fires that were lit in Southern California that they've pinned on him were incendiary devices. So they had a cigarette, and then they had 3 matches, and then a rubber band, and then yellow lined paper. So what happens is they light the cigarette, and then the matches are tied around it. So it gives them time to get out of the store. And what they would do is put it in the, I can't say this word, polyurethane or a certain section of the hardware store. And it gives the person time to get out of the store before the fire actually starts. So that they light it, and then they can get out of the store. Well, there were 2 fires that same night that the Ole's fire started in 2 grocery stores down the street. And those were probably diversionary fires, so that it would have took the resources away from the Ole's fire. So it was 15 minutes before the Ole's fire started. So they believe all of those are connected. And my dad did show up at the Ole's fire very, very immediately when it started. So, and he was videotaping the fire as well.
What?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a few things here. So first of all, I mean, you said it was premeditated. This idea of you light two diversionary fires to distract the fire brigade while you go and light the main event. This is the big one over here. Like that is nuts, That's
Right.
To think this plan through and then enact it is ice cold.
Right.
And then the other thing is like this is a fairly complex little device. Where did he learn to make these things?
Well, I'm not sure if he learned to make them or if he learned from the people who he was investigating all these years.
Yeah.
I don't know. But he would carry those items around with him because he's teaching other arson investigators about these incendiary devices. So he's saying that he had those things in his car because he teaches classes on it.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's a hard one,
Yeah, that's a perfect little loophole.
But they do say that he had videotape of Ollie's before the fire.
Really?
And after.
Like the investigation found that he'd gone in there with a camera to have a look around.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
He was quite methodical with his planning on this stuff.
Very. And there's another fire called the College Hills fire. And he also had a videotape of College Hills, all of the homes up there on the mountain before the fire was ever done, and then the fire when it was burning.
Can you tell me about the College Hills fire?
The College Hills fire was started as, it was very dry out there in the brush, and it was lit, and it burned 67 homes on that mountain. Jeez. And luckily, nobody died in that fire, but it was millions of dollars worth of damage. And when he was arrested, they did find a videotape of the College Hills area before it ever burned. And then while it was burning, they found videotape of it as well.
Yeah, wow. So when you say that he'd show up when the fire was happening with a video camera, like the fact that you know about it indicates that people saw him. So like, what was the reaction there? Why? How would the fire brigade just be working on this, putting out this fire, and he's standing there with a camera? Like, what was happening?
Well, it's not that uncommon though for an arson investigator to tape fires or videotape fires. How it burns and things like that are helpful when you're trying to investigate a fire. So which way it's burning, which way it's going, the burn patterns and all of that. But also an investigator is going to videotape all of the people around because the arsonist almost always is in the close proximity watching the fire burn. So that's why an arson investigator almost always videotapes the area around the fire. So it's not uncommon at all. And people expect to see an arson investigator doing that. Yeah.
You can see why he got away with it for as long as he did.
Absolutely.
There's just so many perfect alibis here.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're the kind of guy who gets off on fires, getting a perfect excuse to videotape the fire that you just lit, amazing. How convenient.
Absolutely. I mean, that's how he got away with it so long.
Yeah, okay.
And why we didn't believe, or we trusted him and believed him for so long before we, or myself, wised up and looked into things myself and figured out about his guilt and innocence.
Yes. So these fires were in the early 80s. I think the Ollie's hardware store, that was 84, I think, off the top of my head.
I believe so.
And he was arrested in 91. So yeah, he got away with it for a long time. You could say he was probably doing this for over a decade. How did he come undone?
That's a good question. I don't know that he came undone, but I think there were some people out there that were just a tiny bit smarter than he.
Right.
And I think that the way that they were able to piece it together was that one of the incendiary devices didn't burn completely. And there was a fingerprint. And that fingerprint was able to identify him eventually. It took a long time. And it was in Bakersfield. And that guy did not give up. And he kept running it in different ways. And that's how they figured it out.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That is amazing. I understand that he lit over 2,000 fires. So to think that it was just one fire at this one place with this one investigator who wouldn't give up on it. I mean, it sounds like his luck just ran out eventually.
Right. And, my dad was always an adamant non-smoker. I mean, he would tell my sister and I not to smoke every time he saw us, like our whole childhood. And there were times when they were investigating him where he stopped on his way to the convention or back from the convention when they were following him, and he went into a store. And when he left, the investigators would go in the store and say, "Hey, what did he buy?" He bought cigarettes. That's another telltale sign. I don't even know if it meant as much to the investigators as it would have meant to me.
Yeah, it meant a lot to you.
Right.
Definitely.
It's like that's a telltale sign right there. Like, my dad would have never bought cigarettes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's so many things that lead to his guilt when I really started to pay attention.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So there were a few stepping stones that led the police to figure out who he was. Tell me about what that journey was like for you, because you were saying that when he was arrested, you mostly believed his story. Dad's innocent. It's going to be all right. Tell me about the process where you decided that he was actually guilty.
Well, I believed him and him being innocent for probably a good, 10 years or so. And I'd talk to him on the phone. I'd visit him. I even visited him once with my first child. But my dad was pretty manipulative with me, asking me for things, sending him money, do this for me, do that for me, being pretty demanding and not really being a dad,
Yeah.
And then I just started to really feel weird about having a relationship with him. And so I thought, I think I'm going to actually start looking into what evidence they had against him, because he wouldn't allow us to go to the trial. I wanted to go to the whole trial and be supportive of him, and he wouldn't allow it. He said, "No, you can't go." And so the first thing I did was read the book Fire Lovers that was written by Joseph Wambaugh.
Okay, and this was about your dad.
Right. And so I read that first, and that gave me a lot of information. And then I picked up the book that my dad wrote, which was Point of Origin. And that's the one that assisted the police in arresting him, because that book was supposed to be fiction, but he changed the names. But the Ole's fire was in there. The College Hills fire was in there. All details of the fires that he's now been convicted of.
This self-published book is a truly bizarre wrinkle in this story. So let's take a moment to explore.
Sure.
So your dad wrote a supposed piece of fiction about a guy named Phil, I think this is right, but correct me if I'm wrong,
No,
who
you're
was
right.
a arson investigator who was investigating all these different arsons happening in LA, and the details in the book, supposedly fictional, just happened to mirror all of the details that were happening in your dad's actual life. And he thought that he was just going to publish this thing and no one was going to be like, this is weird. All right, so I don't know, just tell me about your history with this book. When did it first sort of appear in your world?
It is bizarre. Like, I have to agree with you there. I had no idea that my dad was a writer or aspired to be one. So when he was arrested and things started coming out, that book was one of the things that I was like, what? He wrote a whole novel? It was just bizarre. I couldn't understand it. And so when I decided to start, figuring things out, I'm like, I'm going to have to read that book.
Yeah.
And so I picked up the book and I read the first chapter. And I kid you not, the things in that book were identical to what happened in our life. And I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
He was describing this character, Phil, that lived with this couple. So they were roommates. The couple that he was describing, I remember them. I remember that couple that my dad was living with. I remember the dog he describes. I remember the pictures on the wall that he was describing, because the woman was like a Playboy bunny or something, and there were pictures of her on the wall. Like every single thing he described in there was what I remembered. And I put the book down and I couldn't pick it up again for a year. And the reason I couldn't pick it up for a year is because my feelings came rushing over me going, oh my God, if that's real, what else is real? And everything I know about my dad could change just by finishing this book. Am I ready for that? Like, am I ready for what's going to happen if I finish this book? And I just didn't know if I was ready.
What a wild situation to have this key. You're handed this key that unlocks all the secrets of your dad. And then it's like, but do you really want to know?
Right. I can't even describe it, because I thought it was like, that's when my life's going to change.
You just knew it.
And I had to decide when I was going to do it. When am I going to change my life? Because I knew it was coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was bizarre. So I did. I waited a year, and then I picked it up again and finished it. And yeah, I mean, I knew where I was going with it. And so I continued down that path. And after I read that and started talking to more people, I said, I'm really convinced that there's some truth to all these things everyone's been saying. So I wrote my dad a letter, and I said, hey, I really think you're guilty. I'm really feeling that way. And I need you to convince me that you're innocent. Like, I really need you to tell me. And if you can't do that, then I'm done with you. Like, I don't want to have a relationship anymore. And I mailed it off to him. And within 2 weeks, he sent me back another letter, and it said, you'll see how innocent I am when I get out.
That is a terrible response.
And I didn't talk to him for 15 years.
What did you get out of that response?
Not what I needed.
Yeah.
I needed more than that.
Yeah, totally.
It told me that one of two things: either he's guilty, or he's just too cocky to even care that I'm in his life. And that's just as bad. So I didn't want to have a relationship with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, it's like you're speaking two different languages in that moment. You're like, hey, Dad, I want to believe that you're the man I thought in my childhood. So please help me to do that. And he's not picking up on those signals at all. He's just like, he's sort of taking it as like a personal affront. Like, yeah, I'll show you. Like, just trust me. Stick with me. I don't have to give you anything. I don't have to like give you any love, or like, I don't have to give you any of the emotional things that you need to make this relationship work. He's
Right.
like, just trust me.
Right.
It's like, it's some psychopathic kind of thinking there.
Right. That doesn't work anymore, Dad. I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not just going to trust you.
Totally. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I would have probably not spoken to him for 15 years as well.
Yeah.
So in this book, was there a particular thing that stuck out to you? Like, did he describe the hardware fire, or like, what was the catalyst?
It was really just a number of different things. It was like one thing piled on another thing, and then another thing piled, and another thing. And then other things that were coming from different places, like the Wamba book. And it said that in the Ole's fire, the grandmother and the grandchild and the grandfather was also in there. And they were talking about if the if the grandson would behave well in there, they would go next door to Baskin Robbins and get some ice cream. Well, they talked about what the grandson's favorite flavor was, which was mint chip ice cream. Well, in my dad's book, it talked about the same thing, the grandmother, the grandfather, and the grandchild he called it Cal's hardware store. And the kid wanted mint chip ice cream. I mean, he used it. And the only way my dad would have known that is if he overheard them in that store. So little details like that. And so many, like videotaping the college fire before and after, like there's so many little things that I'm just going, he has to be guilty.
Yeah. It's also just incredibly cold and callous to include the final conversation of a dead family in a book. You know, like he overheard this conversation. He heard this poor kid talking about his love for mint chip or whatever. And then for him, that was nothing more than just an interesting, like, literary moment in his book.
Right. I reached out to the mother and I talked to her. I apologized on behalf of my father. I had to. That poor mother that lost her mother and her child in that fire. She said that she was able to move on and find joy in life and that I should do the same.
Wow.
Yeah, I was so happy to hear that.
That's big. That's big of her.
It was huge because I worried about her, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of the opposite response to the one you got from your dad. You know, that's a response that's so empathetic. She understands what you needed in that moment.
Right.
And was able to be generous despite her loss.
Right.
That's huge.
It's huge.
Hey, we're going to take a quick break here to run a couple of ads, but please stick around because we're going to be right back with more What It Was Like.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hey, true crime fans. Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Hey, me again. Thanks for listening to the ads. Just flagging that the rest of this interview might sound a little different. We had some tech problems and Laurie's mic failed, so we're using some backup audio for the rest of this interview. Stay with us. I understand that your dad talked about Phil, this fictional character. He had a sort of sexual thing for fires. There's a bit of talk about that in the book. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I don't know anything about that except that I do know that when I wrote in my book, we found out a lot of information about some deviant things that my dad had been into with his previous wives. And Russian roulette with one of his wives, like true Russian roulette.
Can you tell me about that? What does that mean?
Well, he would have one of his wives play Russian roulette with his gun, his service gun, with one bullet in there and having her pull the trigger.
What?
Yeah.
Like he would force her to, as almost like a kink.
During his sexual, encounter. Mm-hmm.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. And then he also would have one of his wives dress up in, older clothes and play out a rape scene.
Oh my God.
So there were deviant behaviors that he had.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's not a stretch to believe that he could be aroused by fire, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
But I don't understand it. I can't wrap my mind around it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried to have a conversation with him about this stuff? Have you ever been like, look, Dad, like, what's in your head? Like, describe to me your internal world. Have you ever tried to say that sort of stuff to him?
Recently, my dad's 74 now and still in jail. I did recently decide to start corresponding with him for the purpose of wanting to get questions answered that I never asked when I was 18 years old and he got arrested. And I stayed quiet, and didn't ask him anything. And I said, I want to ask those questions. I don't want him to pass away before I get my questions answered. And so that's what I'm doing now.
Okay.
I don't know what the answers will be. I don't know if it's going to give me any clarity. All I know is that he still proclaims his innocence. I still proclaim his guilt.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm going to get what I need from him. I guess that'll be the next chapter.
I mean, if you had to guess, you've got this array of evidence about who your dad is. If you had to guess, how would you describe him?
What do you mean?
I mean, like, so I think on the one hand, it's easy to look at people who end up in prison, behave really badly, kill people, whatever, and just be like, oh, they're just evil. That's all it is. There's just something wrong with their brain. They don't function properly. They're bad. But I think, of course, criminal behavior is much more complex than that. It's driven by a whole range of motivations that you and I don't feel. So if you had to guess at some of these motivations for your father and to kind of just unpack what was happening for him emotionally, what would your guess be? What was happening for him?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think that the motivation for him is to get away with it. The control, the power. And, but then again, is he a sociopath behind all of that? Maybe. Was he born that way? I think so. I mean, he started his first fire around 5 years old, 5 or 6. I think he was born that way. I think that he had a propensity to like fire, and he stuck with it. I don't understand the psychology behind why he is sticking with he's innocent till the day he dies. Because for me, all I want's the truth, like so desperately. If my dad would just say, hey, I did it, I'm remorseful, or even don't be remorseful. I don't even care about that part. Just tell me the truth. I just want the truth. He can't give me that. I just want to know the truth.
Yeah, that's frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't even explain why I want the truth so bad. I just want to know because he says he's innocent. Everyone else says he's guilty. I just want to know for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something brave. Even when someone's really messed up, there's something attractively brave about the truth. If they can just say, hey, you know what? I'm bad. That's why I did it. You'd be like, all right, well, you're a dick, but hey, at least you had the courage to know that. Right. There's something admirable even about that.
Absolutely. And then I could even maybe have some sort of relationship with them. Like, I mean, I don't have a dad. And part of me wants one. Well, yeah. I really want one. And I can't have one. So we're deep inside, if he could just say that and I could find some type of forgiveness and just get something, from him. I don't know. It's all just a dream.
Yeah. I mean, what does that dream look like? What is the best case sort of ending for this story for you?
I don't know. I mean, some sort of relationship that we could just be father-daughter, and the crime is the crime, and that's just pushed aside.
Yeah.
You know, we could get to know each other just as father and daughter, because right now we're just strangers.
I mean, it sounds like you've got a good life now. You know, you've got 4 kids, and there's lots that you enjoy about your life. How much is this thing with your father cast a shadow over your world?
Wow. I think it's affected me a lot more than I care to admit.
Yeah.
It's affected my relationships with men. I had a horrible stepfather. And then this situation with my dad, trusting men was not easy. And I trusted the wrong men. So I'm on my 4th marriage, which is not something to be proud of. My dad was on his 4th marriage. So in some ways I took, but I wasn't going to put up with any crap from any man. So I got out of relationships that were not good. I'm happily married now, and I'm very proud of that. My kids have been raised. I've been single mom by myself. I've, not relied on men. So I am a strong person because of what I've been through. But I'm also a damaged person. I've had low self-esteem. I've had issues, thinking that I'm worthy, I haven't had a relationship with my dad, a good one. And so things have been challenging. But on the other hand, I've written a book, and I am the one who tracked down a co-author to do it. I looked for a publisher to do it. I spent 5 years on the grind making that happen. Like, I did it myself. And I'm proud of that. I'm really happy that I stuck with that and I got it to the publication point, so I really do feel accomplished with that. So there's been good and bad with this situation,
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess if I could change it all, I would, because I want a dad. I want a good dad. But other than that, it made me a strong person. I'm a much stronger woman for it. And I've been able to help people. I've been able to do public speaking and really help younger women who think that they're in a situation that they'll never get out of. And I can show them that it's their choice. Life is about choices, because I could have easily said, oh, my dad was arrested, I'm just going to give up on life and do drugs. And, I would have been justified, Yeah, it's horrible. But that's not what I wanted to do. Why? And I have found joy in life. I've had bumps along the way, but I'm never going to stop trying to be happy.
I think that's a really important message. I feel like you're in a position where you've walked a pretty tricky journey. You've got some life lessons. What advice would you have to people who, God, parents are a great source of trauma for all sorts of people for all sorts of reasons. What sort of universal advice have you got?
I think the best advice I can give is don't stop trying to be happy. Don't settle for anything less than happy. Like I said, I'm on my 4th marriage, and I could have sat in any one of those previous marriages and just said, oh, I don't want another divorce, so I'm just going to sit in this marriage for 30 years and be miserable. I could have done that and, maybe save face, but for who? Why? I want to be happy. I want to find joy in life. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
And so I say, if you're not happy in your job or you're not happy in your relationship, change it. Don't be scared to change things. Just keep going forward and find what makes you happy. Don't stop till the day you die. Always try to find some happiness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. I think that's so good. Well, Laurie, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your story with me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. You should absolutely go and check out Laurie's book. She co-wrote it with a best-selling crime author named Frank Giraudoux, and he actually attended John Orr's trial. And the book, it's called Burned: Pyromania, Murder, and a Daughter's Nightmare. And Laurie has actually very kindly offered to give away 2 copies of her book to the first 2 people who hit her up. You can find the link in our show notes. So this show is going out on November 1, so if you're hearing this and it's pretty close to November 1, 2024, please get in touch with Laurie, tell her you'd love a copy of the book, and you might be lucky enough to receive a signed copy in the mail. Today's episode was produced by Rachel Tuffery. It was mixed by Jimmy Saunders, who also did our theme music. Darcy Humphreys and Daniela Cantu are our interns. Our cover art is by Naomi Lee Beveridge, and this whole thing has been a Super Real production.
Hi, this is Master Model Builder Andrew from the LEGO Discovery Center, Washington, D.C., inviting you to the top family Halloween event, Brick or Treat. Brew up fun at the Potion Kitchen and make a magical potion. Catch the exclusive 4D LEGO movie, The Great Monster Chase. Take on the LEGO Monster Rocker Scavenger Hunt and Mini World. Grab a selfie with the LEGO Mummy and much more now through October 31st. Discover 12 eye-catching zones at LEGO Discovery Center, Washington, D.C. Get your tickets today at legodiscoverycenter.com/Washington, D.C.